Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as I look at the 1992-93 Score hockey set. 92 is an interesting year for Score where, looking back, you can kind of see that they were sort of prepping for 1993. Not that the pieces were so much in place. You can see some of the design elements, but 93 was the first year where Score did the same card design for all of their sports, which they had already done in Pinnacle right from the outset, but for Score there was always a different look for every single sport. And 1992 was the last year we would see it. But the thing that was really interesting about the 92 designs was how they kind of flipped how they've been approaching cards. Because in 1990 and 91, football was where they had innovative card designs. In baseball, they had very blocky cards, and in hockey, they had I'm not going to comment on the 90 design, but the 91 design was starting to get kind of dynamic and cool. Not as well developed as with football. But in 1992, the football card got super blocky. The baseball card got really dynamic, almost like they were apologizing for not doing a 1991 Pinnacle design, so they did a version of that for Score. And then for hockey, well, the hockey card kind of came out of nowhere. It's a really interesting and complex design. But one interesting thing about this is you'll notice there's a white border. And this is the third time that they had done a white border in Score, but the second time was earlier in the year with baseball. So they had the 89 baseball design and the 92 baseball design, and then they had the 92 hockey design. Not 92 football. They did that one with a normal color bleed all the way to or color border all the way to the outside. But the hockey card is kind of interesting the way that worked, because inside of that they have an inner border that is it's a quarter bleed in a way, but it's a 3/4 border which is split in half so that the 3/4 side of it has, it's not a marble, but it's like, it's kind of like reflections of ice. And then the other side ends up just as two color boxes, which are team colored. The colors of the boxes are based on the team. This is unique because this is the first time that Score had ever done this. In 1990 with hockey, they had a single border for the whole card set. In 1991, they had 3 different borders, but still, every single set was done with the same border. And over in 1990 football, they did have a team color feature on the card, but in this set, this card is actually all about a color theme that has nothing to do with where it is in the set. That's brand new. But this is the hockey set, and with the hockey set, there's usually a US release and a Canadian release, and that's no different. However, what is different is that the cards are wildly different. I mean, okay, in 1991, they had different color borders and different images between, well, some of the cards had different images between the US and Canadian releases. In 1992, they just went with a completely different border. I mean, this is a border that shares absolutely nothing. There is nothing on this card that looks the same. It has an outer border that is a deep teal metallic finish, which actually does have the ice stripes that are in it. It's kind of textured in. It's really subtle. But inside of that, they just have bands at the top and the bottom, and they have a team logo on the front, which is cool. But nothing about this card is the same. It really would look like a wildly different card set, except all of the card numbers are the same. I mean, every single one, with the exception of 2 cards at the end of the set, where for the Canadian release it's Maurice Richard and, well, Maurice Richard, but the US release has 2 different players. Other than that, they're identical sets, numerically speaking. I mean, even the card backs are wildly different, where for the Canadian release, it's a vertical card back and bilingual. All of these cards are bilingual. They didn't do the US language Canadian release like they'd done in 1991. So it really can kind of throw you off. It's also kind of a cool thing. So most of the cards were done in the same way, but this was the last year that Score did a lot of subset cards. And really, they did have some fun with some of these. Like, for instance, the League Leaders card it's actually virtually the exact same design as the Canadian player release, except they have some, well, obviously for the US release, they have the white border, but they have little boxes of color for the first letters of the player's name and the number 92, which add a dynamic quality, which along with the real fine text gives a cool, intricate quality to the card that makes it pretty compelling. This is a surprisingly interesting card. Now, the franchise cards are quite different because in this case, they use a single color over the whole background, which is a team-oriented color, and then the player pops out from the middle of it. And this can be a pretty mundane trick if not done right. But they did it right here, and when it's done right, it looks really cool. And for this card set, it's a great success for how these cards came out. Now, for the highlights cards, this is interesting because this is a super, super boring card. Very blocky, very overly simplistic, except for the text for the word highlight. And what's interesting is that it is, first off, it's bright red, it's got a comic-like look to it. But when I look at it, I actually think of the highlight magazines that were done for kids in the 1990s. But still, all it needs is that text, and that text alone makes this card an exciting, vibrant card. It takes a card that otherwise would be really boring and bland and makes it invigorating and gets me to want to explore the card. This is one of those cases where the subtlety of good card design or a good graphic design really comes to a fore, and you can see it. You can really see it in action. And you can also see the opposite in action with the prospect cards, where for here this is as bland as you're gonna find anywhere, and nothing helps it. I mean, just a box up at the top. I like that it has the team logo in it, but the logo doesn't fit with anything. And then they got the floating prospects logo down below, and it's just that. It really is a lackluster card. Thankfully, once we get out of that, we get to go to the Dream Team cards. And the Dream Team cards are an interesting shade on what they'd done in 1991 for football. Here they have a small cutout action shot of the player. And then in the background, they have a portrait of the player, but he's not ghosted in, but it's all in a blue tint that gives a really interesting and surreal look, primarily the way that the player is featured in that portrait. And the card looks, well, I look at this card and I wish there was a full bleed card, except because that's what they did in football, but this would not have worked as a full bleed card. But that said, we're looking at the US release. If you look at the Canadian release, you realize that actually this card does look great in the Canadian release because the border is almost the exact right tone for the image inside, which makes this a pretty fun card to look at. And then they have a Rookie Dream Team card set, and in this case, neither border really makes the whole effect look good because the background is decent enough. The logos in the background, I don't mind that, but the particular color that they have and the way that the player looks in sharp contrast to it makes this card difficult to really refine in the way that the regular Dream Team cards came out. It's still a good card. It's not quite at the level of what the Dream Team cards were. But look, they're rookies. They got plenty of time. They'll get better in time, I'm sure. Now, 1992 was an expansion year at a more heightened level than 91, because in 1991 they added the San Jose Sharks, and so that was the big year for the Sharks. Well, in 92 we were seeing the addition of the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Ottawa Senators, and so they had two cards, one for each of the two teams, their logo cards on the front with a black to white fade on the card. These are really good logo cards on the front. But when you look on the back, they actually have the roster, well, sort of the roster. What they have is the expansion draft for each one of the teams. So instead of a schedule or a write-up of the team or anything like that, which is what we're used to, in this case, it just says here are the players who have been brought in to provide the core of this team. And then, of course, the rookies are going to be filling it out, also the free agents that they sign. But this is unique. I don't remember ever seeing an expansion card where they're listing the initial roster from the expansion draft. So that's a cool trick that they played to make this card different from the way we normally see these cards. And then they did 2 standalone cards for champions. The first one is the Pittsburgh Penguins, who were the champions of the Stanley Cup, in a card that kind of stands out to me because, look, I'm football and basketball, so I'm not used to the locker room shots that we see all the time in hockey and quite often in baseball. To me, that's not a celebration shot. You might see one of those from time to time, but normally the celebration is on the field or on the court from what I'm used to. And in hockey, that's pretty common too, but here, this is a weird look for somebody who's not a hockey fan because it looks wrong. Why in the world would you choose this card? Which is why I am paying better attention to the Memorial Cup card, because here, this looks right. I mean, obviously not for the NHL. For a minor league team, this is exactly the way that you would normally see a championship card, but in this case, that's exactly what I want to see. I want to look at it and go, okay, yes, now I feel better. Kind of weird, but that you can tell that Stanley Cup card really threw me off. And then they have their award winners cards. And the award winners cards, this is a weird mashup of things because they have a photo corner there and they have dotted lines almost like you're supposed to cut it out or something like that. They have a paintbrush swoosh down at the bottom. It's weird because it looks like 3 different people came up with 3 different ideas for the card and they couldn't settle on it, so they just threw them all on. It's an interesting dynamic card where the nature of how the design worked is really kind of a jumbled mess. But it is a pretty unique card, and I'm really intrigued by it. To me, this kind of grabs me and holds on to me. Now, I did mention that the Canadian release was different from the US release, and I mentioned that in the Canadian release they had 2 cards of Maurice Richard. Well, they also had 2 SP cards of Maurice Richard as well. These are high gloss cards, 3/4 bleed, with a look that very much looks like Pinnacle, and so these 2 cards, they're different, but they also have an autographed version, which is out there as well. These cards were only released in Canadian packs. I don't know the rate that they showed up in. I don't know that anybody's recorded that. But they are these 2 standalone cards. And they also had another insert card in packs, or another SP card. In this case, it was the press conference for Eric Lindros. Now, Eric Lindros was the darling for Score, so of course they were going to get a card in here at some point. This is a single standalone card that was both given away to the press as well as inserted at a very difficult to get rate in packs. So these cards are chased with a lot of enthusiasm. So don't expect for one of these to be very cheap. But they did surprisingly few inserts for 1992 simply because I would expect that they would have started to ramp things up. But they only have 3 insert sets, and yet even at that it's really just 2. Now, the jumbo packs had sharpshooter cards. These are a lot like the Maurice Richard cards where they are 3/4 bleed, black band at the bottom. They are glossy cards. In this case, they have some gold foil on them, which makes them a little bit more vibrant. And the cards come both in US packs and Canadian packs. And the Canadian packs are bilingual, whereas the US packs are just obviously in English. So these cards do come in both different versions. But that is one of the 2 inserts that show up in packs in either case. The other one set is different from the Canadian release versus the US release. The Canadian packs have the Team Canada cards, which have red and white, glorious display of the Canadian team. They have red foil on the cards, which is this is pretty unusual at this point to see red foil on a card. So that's a cool feature that is a part of the set. But as you can imagine, if they have a Canadian Team US or a Team Canada card, of course they have a Team USA card as well, which is what showed up in US packs. Here, obviously, they are leaning a lot more toward blue to differentiate, and everything that you would expect about this card is the way that it comes across. But it means that for collecting packs of cards, you either got one insert set you basically got one insert set wherever you were at. I don't think the jumbo cards had the the Team USA and the Team Canada cards. So I think there was only a single insert set available in packs. And then they did do one other thing, only one other thing, which was they did their Young Superstars card set again. Here it's a 40 card set. These cards have, they're high gloss cards. They have the same ice theme on it that we saw in the US versions of cards, and then also ghosted into the Canadian cards. They have that streaking across the card, and yeah, sold in a complete set form. And that was all they did for 1992. You know, obviously they were still leaning very heavily onto subsets, and they just weren't into insert sets yet. And they had a ways that they were going to have to go. And they would pick that up in 1993. They get a lot more into the inserts. But in 1992, it was pretty bleak in terms of inserts. But at least the main set was more vibrant. And they did not do a Series 2. It was just straight across the table. This is your 550 card set. So that was their 1992 release. For 1993, they were going to start streamlining and developing a card set that was more unified across all four sports. Well, excuse me, all three sports. They never did basketball. So that would start to happen. This was the very last set that Score made that was unique for, well, okay, no, actually, in just a couple of years, they would get back to doing unique cards. So they would have a little brief time of going back to this. But 1993, that would be the same across all three, which I'm going to look at in another video. So if you have any questions about this, let me know in the comments below. Go ahead and ask me the questions. And if you haven't subscribed already, I do urge you to do so. And thank you very much for watching.